What's up, folks? I'm Chris, your NFL writer here at Occupy Fantasy, here with a look at the 10-game Week 6 main slate of the NFL season. I'm going to give you some of the top picks for DraftKings and FanDuel on this slate. And as always, I like to start with the top play for all lineup types. And I think this is one of those spots where we don't have to overthink the options here. We have a home favorite running back here who is favored by 2 touchdowns. Josh Jacobs is facing a Bengals rush defense that ranks 26th by DVOA defending running backs this season, and they are dead last in the NFL defending running backs in the passing game. We've only really seen Jacobs hit his ceiling once, and it was last time out against the Dallas Cowboys before the bye. Now has a real chance to get some home cooking going against a reeling Bengals defense here, and I think he's a easy play in all lineup types against the Bengals here in NFL DFS this week. Behind him, we have the Indianapolis Colts. They are favored by 8 points here in their matchup with the Arizona Cardinals. That could move a little bit because Kyler Murray is questionable to play this week. We'll see how that materializes on Sunday. But Jonathan Taylor has been an absolute touchdown machine here. 3 touchdowns in 2 separate games. Home here against Arizona, who is actually an above average rush defense. They're ranked 7th defending running backs on the ground this year, but they're below average defending running backs in the passing game. And that is a spot where we have seen Taylor be more involved, 4+ targets over the last 3 weeks of play here. Exorbitant price tag on Taylor on both sites, so I don't think he's going to be played much in low risk because of some of the value plays that are going to be popular, but that makes him an awesome pivot as a result of the situation that he is in here. We have the Rams favored by 7.5 points against the Baltimore Ravens on the road, and that is because Lamar Jackson is going to miss another game here in Week 6. Kyren Williams, awesome game against the 49ers other than the fumble with 32.1 DraftKings points here last weekend, and he's going to have a chance to repeat that performance here. The Rams have the perfect storm formula for success in the running game. Number 1 run blocking offensive line by adjusted line yards this season. Ravens 27th defending running backs on the ground. Slightly below average defending running backs in the passing game, and we saw last week, Kyren is capable of performing in a game script where Matthew Stafford has to target him heavily with the football here. So I love using Kyren in all lineup types. Another play here that's not projecting to be in the top 3 or 4 highest owned running backs. So actually he becomes a great play for tournament lineups here. Not necessarily low risk, although I would be fine running him in a low risk lineup in this situation here. Finally, we have the Pittsburgh Steelers favored by 6 points against the Cleveland Browns at home. And we're expecting Jaylen Warren to return to the lineup after missing the Dublin game for the Steelers before the bye week. Clean injury status here. He's expected to go resume his RB1 role. Really cheap price here. However, he's facing the number 1 rush defense in football in the Cleveland Browns, and they are top 7 in the NFL defending running backs in the passing game as well. So I don't think he's going to be a low risk play at all, but decent for high risk tournaments here against Cleveland's stout rush defense. Now, the most popular plays this week at the position, we actually have underdog Christian McCaffrey with his number 1 target in the passing game role for the 49ers, still sitting at the top of ownership tables. We got 7+ targets in every single game this year. We've got another situation here where the 49ers project to miss their top receiving weapons. Ricky Pearsall has already been ruled out. Juwan Jennings is questionable. It remains to be seen how active Jennings will be, even if he is active, quote unquote, for the game. I would expect McCaffrey to still retain the biggest and best high floor and high ceiling role in the NFL at the running back position here in a potential trailing game script. If you're looking for a reason to consider not playing him in low risk, it's because the Bucs are actually a top 4 rush defense this year. So that will be kind of tough for him. And we have not seen McCaffrey eclipse 70 rushing yards just yet on the season. His production has been all PPR value here in the passing game. And that will be the reason to play him here, because the Bucs are actually the 5th worst defense defending running backs in the passing game. I feel like I say this every week, McCaffrey's on the slate. Not a good recipe when you're facing the best pass catching running back in the league here. This is the first slate this season that both McCaffrey and Puka Nacua have been on where it hasn't been super easy to find a path to jamming them both into your lineup. And I do think this week the field is more likely to play McCaffrey than Nacua because of price. But this, I think, is a spot where you can differentiate in low risk if you would like with the other plays that I've already given you. And then we also have Rico Dowdle. How about that game last week for Dowdle against the Dolphins, huh? I don't think we're going to expect 200+ yards and a rushing touchdown again here against the Dallas Cowboys, but this is a below average rush defense, 23rd in the league, and below average defending running backs in the passing game. Dowdle, an easy click at this price of $5,800 on DraftKings and $6,600 over on FanDuel. talked about McCaffrey and the underdog side of that game in the late window here. We do have confirmation Bucky Irving is going to be out again this week, so Rachaad White also playable here. 6,000 on DraftKings, very cheap over on FanDuel. He is 6,800 on FanDuel versus just the 6,600 for Rico Dowdle over on FanDuel. I do think White is going to be a better low-risk play on FanDuel if you look at the pricing of all the top backs. He seems to land in optimal lineups over on FanDuel a little more easily than over on DraftKings this week. So put him in your low-risk pool, but I think he's more of a FanDuel play for you FanDuel guys this week. All right, let's look at the quarterback position. We have some games with some decent totals this week. Dallas and Carolina is by far the most popular game, 49.5 points. It's a big reason why Rico Dowdle is going to be in here. One more running back play before we move on, actually. Javonte Williams with Dallas. 6,400 here on DraftKings, especially PPR value. Not as many targets over the last couple of weeks, but he has been a really, really awesome asset for the Cowboys here, and he should benefit from a great matchup against Carolina as well. Dallas is the favored side here. Dallas is the third best run blocking offensive line by adjusted line yards. Roughly league average are the Panthers defending running backs on the ground, and they're very above average defending running backs in the passing game. We got unfortunate news today that Miles Sanders is on injured reserve and is expected to miss the rest of the season. So it's only rookie Jaden Blue backing up Javonte Williams here. And I think that means Javonte is in line for a strong workload for as long as he is able to handle it throughout the rest of the season. Great running back to shove in your lineups this week in this high total game at 49.5 points. I was going to turn to the next two highest total games at 47.5 points. One of those games is Seattle at Jacksonville, and that features the slight home underdog in Trevor Lawrence. Now, we saw Lawrence be very productive last week in fantasy football against the Kansas City Chiefs in Monday Night Football, mixing it up for 50-plus rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. That's not his MO here, but at $5,100 on DraftKings and a modest $6,700 here over on FanDuel, you'll find I think he's going to end up being one of the more popular plays at the position. Also at 47.5 points, we have that Indianapolis and Arizona game, so maybe you could look to Daniel Jones. I'm a little surprised this week, looking at our projected ownership in the Occupy model, to see that Lawrence right now anyway is projecting to be second most popular, once again behind Justin Herbert. And we got a comment last week about how the entire offensive line was going to be out, and so Herbert wasn't going to be very popular. He was popular, but Double J was on it in the comments. Shout out to you, dude. It was not necessarily the best spot to play him. It looks even worse this week. There are 3 offensive linemen that appear to be injured and missing this game. Not necessarily the best time to deploy Justin Herbert, so I do think I'll look to save salary off of Herbert and play Trevor Lawrence in low risk this week. 5,100 on DraftKings, 6,600 over on FanDuel. Seems like a pretty good spot here as well. When we look at the matchup with Seattle, roughly league average defending in the passing game are these Seahawks right now, and that means we should see Trevor Lawrence focus on Brian Thomas and Travis Hunter pretty heavily here. We have Brenton Strange on injured reserve, so we also have a pretty good feeling about those receivers having a higher floor than normal in this spot as well. Now, you see some of these receivers in my lineup. I mentioned how it's difficult with their pricing to get McCaffrey and Puka in the same lineup. If you look at the lineup I've built here, we can't make it work. We're below the minimum price for a tight end with a defense that I think is playable. Obviously, you come all the way down, and I guess you could do this, but I don't think it's the right path. I don't think it's where the field is going to go this week. I think what you have to do is decide which one of these two guys, if either, you want in your low-risk lineups this week. And I think of the two, I probably prefer Puka Nacua here. Nacua is probably going to be like the 4th or 5th most popular wide receiver in projection models this week, and it's because of this salary squeeze at the top with Nacua and Christian McCaffrey. But when we consider how poor the Ravens have been this year at defending the passing game, and we consider how concentrated the offense is on the Rams offense this year, Stafford is basically only throwing the football to Puka and Devontae Adams. Puka accounts for 36% of team targets and 35% of team air yards over the last 3 weeks of play. Devontae Adams on his heels in terms of air yards, 34%, 21% of team targets. That is 60% of team targets, 70% of team air yards. Just a phenomenally high floor for the top 2 wide receivers in this offense. And I think it's a good reason to consider stacking the Rams here, by the way, in high-risk contests. But when we look at low-risk contests for week number 6, We're going to look at a Rams offense as the fourth highest implied team total, facing a Ravens defense that's probably going to be on the field a lot because Cooper Rush is playing and not Lamar Jackson, and they are 26th defending the pass. They are below average defending top receivers. It's just a recipe for success for Rams receivers. And I think Puka is the far safer play for a low-risk lineup here on both sides. I prefer getting to him. It's probably how I'm going to play this week, and I think we can do it with a cheap quarterback and these mid-range running backs, especially with Jacobs in that awesome spot against the Bengals this week at a modest price compared to McCaffrey, right? So that's how I'm thinking about this slate. Now we have a nice little skinny stack here that I think you can play in low-risk contests in this Patriots and Saints game. When we look at the Patriots offense, we have seen Stephon Diggs really shine over the last couple of weeks. He was targeted on over 50% of his routes. He's still playing somewhat of a part-time role coming back from the ACL surgery that he had last year as a member of the Houston Texans. But this week is an awesome matchup for him. Drake May and the Patriots facing the fourth worst pass defense in the NFL, and they're the worst pass defense defending number one receivers, which I think we can definitively say Stephon Diggs is operating as right now. So I love getting Diggs into a low-risk lineup this week. When we look at recent usage, Diggs has a 28% share of Patriots team targets and a 36% share of team targets. So a very high floor here for him. We could probably price him. We can probably project him, for about 7+ targets here once again. And if we get double-digit targets, then it's probably easy money here, putting him in a low-risk lineup. On the other side of that matchup, the PPR scam artist, as a lot of people are calling him in fantasy football land right now, Chris Olave. His salary does not seem to move. It has fluctuated between $4,900 and $5,200 here on DraftKings. He's really modestly priced over on FanDuel as well. I think we'll see him operate in a strong role as well against the Patriots defense that might be missing Christian Gonzalez again in this secondary. Probably bad news to try and lock down the number one receiver on the opposing offense. 30% share of team targets, 31% share of team air yards. And on the season as a whole, the New England Patriots are the fifth worst pass defense, and they are below average defending number one receivers. So I do think this is how I would land on a low-risk lineup that includes Puka Nacua. At tight end, you do have to punt a little bit, and this might be where people aren't on board with the play here, because when we look at projected ownership, the field is very heavily invested in Trey McBride. He's going to be 20 to 30% owned this week. Jake Ferguson as the number one receiver, theoretically anyway, for the Dallas Cowboys. He's seen more target volume than George Pickens most weeks. Brock Bowers is out this week. We have Tyler Warren with the Colts. I just think that group there, probably drawing the line, including Tucker Kraft with the Packers, that's probably where the field is going to be with most of their plays this week. So to get to a top tight end, let's just go with McBride. We're going to have to find a way to save $2,000 here and come off of Nacua. And there are plays down here. We obviously have Devontae Adams. We could go with that and still get access to that great play against the Ravens defense here. But I think the most popular play in this range is going to be Tet McMillan with the Carolina Panthers. Tet McMillan is actually one of the receivers on our underperforming wide receiver list this week. Tet has underperformed his expected fantasy point total by about 25 fantasy points here. As Brian talked about in the showdown video for Thursday night in the game between the Giants and the Eagles, when we look at an underperforming receiver and we calculate expected fantasy points, we're looking at the whole sum of target and air yard opportunities. McMillan has not capitalized on all of the opportunities that Bryce Young has thrown his way. And I think if you've been watching the Panthers, you would tell me that that's because Bryce Young has just missed him several times. There's just been some bad throws, and some of those air yards are somewhat fraudulent. I'm with you there, but the intent still matters, right? We know that Bryce Young wants to target Tet heavily. This is a good matchup against one of the softest pass defenses in the NFL. And I do think Tet McMillan ends up being someone that you can consider for all contest types. I like him in my low-risk lineup if you're building a team that does not include Nacua here. You get him in here. We got $700. It means we can play a little bit with the defense that we get into our lineup here, or maybe we find our way back up to McCaffrey. This is kind of a choose-your-own-adventure slate to a certain degree. There's a rough pool of plays that fit for low risk, and this might actually be a slate that people like a little better because of that, because it's not the type of slate where you're basically playing 2v2s, 3v3s versus everyone in your head-to-heads. There's a few different paths towards a solid low-risk lineup on this slate this week. Over on FanDuel, you see that I basically was able to get to Puka with Trey McBride. Once again, $60,000 cap, a little bit more flexible here. And I do think that the Carolina Panthers defense ends up being popular as kind of the best of the worst, if that makes sense, at that low salary range for a low risk target here. Okay, so that's the low risk lineups for DraftKings and FanDuel and the framework that I think everyone is going to be operating from this week. What are some of the top plays for high risk lineups this week? What am I looking at for stacks? My number one offense to stack in high risk this week is going to be the Rams against that Ravens defense. They have the fourth highest implied team total. I already went over this. They have well below average defense defending quarterbacks in the passing game, defending top receivers. They are getting some reinforcements. They are going to get Kyle Hamilton back at safety and Marlon Humphrey back at cornerback. So maybe that will help them raise their level of play and defend a little bit. But they're coming out of the gate here with a really tough challenge against the Rams and their aerial attack here. So I think Stafford and both of the receivers are very playable, Puka and Devontae Adams. And we can use some of those value plays at running back to make this work. We have Dowdle. We have Rashad White. We have at tight end the ability to pay down a little bit. I think David Njoku sits here as a great option in a passing game script for the Cleveland Browns. We can get a cheap defense in here like I had with the Panthers, $5,300 per player remaining. There's plenty of room here. You got Olave, access to him. You got other receivers that fit in that salary range. There's even some running backs that fit as well, maybe like a Jalen Warren from the Steelers. But I love trying to double stack Stafford here this week. And I think something you could do to get a little creative and build a true 3-1. We haven't really seen Derrick Henry hit a ceiling in fantasy football since week 1. And it is a difficult matchup here, obviously, against the Rams. It's not necessarily the best matchup for Derrick Henry. They're above average defending the rush, 10th by DVOA. The Ravens have the third worst run blocking offensive line this year, but they're going to have to lean in this running game to get something going here. And this would probably be the most obvious 3-1 game stack to run with the Ravens if you wanted to include a bring back here. Touchdown underdog, not necessarily the best time to play a running back, but I could see that path here. It's probably my only way that I would prefer to use a Raven with the Rams here in high-risk contests. The field is all over Dallas and Carolina. And I think it's going to basically be Dak. It's going to be George Pickens, who's in the low-risk pool, by the way. He's going to be fairly popular this week. You got Jake Ferguson. With Carolina, you have you could do a 3-2 here in small field stuff. You got Dowdle. You have Tet McMillan, who is really, really cheap at receiver. Like I said, I think you could run this core here, 4,900. We can punt with defense. We can play the Bengals. There's ways to get this in here. 58.66 per player remaining. You get that Olave play in here. 62.50. Who's another cheap running back? We know that Rashad White's going to catch a little bit of ownership. 6,500 left. Let's get Dowdle into a running back spot here. Set up the flex. 6,500 for a flex play. Got Javonte here as well. Like, you could absolutely mega stack this game, and I do think you will see the field consider that to some degree. But this is going to be the most popular game to play players in high-risk contests from because of that high total and how both defenses have basically been a sieve this year, allowing offensive production on both sides of the football. One more play that I think is viable for high risk this week. The touch volume for Quinshon Judkins has been incredible with the Cleveland Browns here. You see 20-plus carries over the last couple of weeks. I think Judkins could be a good play in high risk. He's popping in my top 5 running backs for raw projections just based off of his expected touch volume here against Pittsburgh. I would consider including him in high-risk lineups. But the real high-risk plays everyone is looking for more elaboration on, I know they're the underperforming wide receivers, and I already gave you one with Tet McMillan on this slate. We have some plays on some bad teams, unfortunately. That's kind of the theme of the underperforming wide receiver list at this point. We have Calvin Ridley with the Tennessee Titans. When we look at roles over the last 3 weeks, Ridley was a little nicked up in week 4. Didn't play as much in that game, but he still has the number one opportunity in the passing game here for the Titans. 19 targets over the last 3 weeks of play, 21% of team targets, 40% of team air yards. No touchdowns for Ridley over the last 3 weeks, and that's a big indicator and input. No touchdowns on the season for an underperforming wide receiver. Really good volume last week, 5 receptions, 131 yards. With that score, he's still underperforming his opportunity. So that tells you what kind of opportunity we have here with Calvin Ridley. We have 2 receivers from the Cleveland Browns that are on the underperforming wide receiver list. And I've got a little bit of context here behind this that'll help you understand this a little bit more. Both Jerry Jeudy and Isaiah Bond are underperforming their opportunities in this offense over the last 3 weeks of play. When we look at just the raw numbers here, it looks strong on paper. They both have over 230 air yards. They have no touchdowns. They each have 16 targets in the last 3 weeks of play. This kind of suggests that it's a quarterback problem, and it's an offense problem, and it's a system problem. But these guys are both underperforming like this at the same time. Cleveland just has not been able to connect with their receivers this year. We're hoping that the switch to Dylan Gabriel obviously will improve the situation here and take these two guys off of our underperforming wide receiver list. But basically what I'm saying is proceed with caution before deploying either of these guys in any lineups this week. We have Devontae Adams underperforming his opportunities with the Rams, and that's really, really good for our preferred stack this week of the Rams and high-risk contests. You can see here 25 targets over the last 3 weeks of play for Adams. He's got 12 receptions for 200 yards. He has underperformed his expected fantasy point production by about 20 fantasy points, despite having 2 touchdowns in that sample. The opportunity volume that Adams has, really, really large, and one of the better passing attacks in the league. Probably the best player on this list to try to incorporate into your lineups, in my opinion, this week. We have Brian Thomas Jr., a good option to pair with the popular quarterback in low-risk lineups of Trevor Lawrence in a high-risk build. I think he's another play that makes a ton of sense here this week, especially with Brenton Strange on the shelf. That should lead to a little bit of a higher target floor here for Thomas. Seems to finally be getting back on track with Trevor Lawrence. A little bit of a better performance last week for him here against the Chiefs. And over the last 3 weeks for Thomas, we've got 19 targets, 224 air yards, 22% of team targets, 32% of team air yards. Seems to be set up to continue to have a high floor. And we're looking for that ceiling outcome to finally materialize here. The final underperforming wide receiver is going to come from the woeful Cincinnati Bengals and T. Higgins. Now, maybe Joe Flacco will have more success with the Bengals than he did with the Browns this season. I think that's a big ask of Flacco. But when we look at T. Higgins' numbers over the last 3 weeks, Higgins has seen comparable opportunity in this offense to number 1 receivers around the league and hasn't produced. He's got 15 targets, just 7 receptions for 69 receiving yards on 220 air yards in the last 3 weeks of play. He is underperforming his expected fantasy points by about 20 fantasy points here. And like I said, change of quarterback, maybe that helps him get over the hump here. We do have Jamar Chase added late to the injury report this week with an illness on Friday. He sits, and that might actually tilt the scales a little bit towards Higgins in high risk as a solid play, underperforming his opportunity this week. Bottom line for me here, guys, I do think that Ram stack is awesome for high-risk contests. I do think that we have a lot of plays that we can consider in low-risk lineups that are awesome this week. Framework pretty much right over here on FanDuel on the screen. I think Josh Jacobs is the best play on the entire slate. And I think he might actually come at a little bit of an ownership discount, which is a situation where I like to play a little bit more heavily in DFS when we can get the best play into our lineups at a little bit of a lower cost in one of the best matchups on this slate. What do you think is the best play on this slate? Leave a comment in the comment section below and let us know what you think about week number 6 in the NFL. Thanks for watching the video. As always, guys, for Occupy, I am Chris. I'll be back next week to talk to you about week 7.